We ended last time on a cliffhanger with a 1,300-man Imperial army besieging Dunglanys. And of course, I only had about 330 men. But these were my best men. I have the phalanx in the field, I have my Battanian Fian champions in the field, and various elite auxiliaries to support them. So I went in. This battle took place in a hilly, wooded area. The battlefield itself was quite large, and the enemy themselves were very reticent to engage with me. However, I played this cautiously too. 1,300 men is a lot. It is a very big enemy army, and so I began by drawing out and skirmishing with their cavalry. This wasn't especially effective, but I wanted to bring my men up slowly and hopefully draw out whatever I could of theirs and destroy them piecemeal. The cavalry skirmish didn't go very far, but it gave me something to do while my men were advancing across the field. But like I said, I wasn't just rushing into this. I was genuinely worried that I was going to get overwhelmed. I went up to investigate their lines and discovered, yep, they had a hell of a lot of men, and a hell of a lot of cavalry. And probably a lot of archers too, and my goodness, this was going to be tough. My cavalry and I kept skirmishing with their horde of knights, and eventually had to fall back on the pikemen to save us, because frankly, they were kicking our asses. But I advanced the pikemen first and advanced my Battanian archers behind them, and it seemed best to simply go to one side of the map so we couldn't be so easily outflanked. I was looking for quite a clear line of fire for the archers, and to be able to advance on them with the pike phalanx, but frankly, the terrain just was not very good for me. I made the decision to basically sacrifice my cavalry to draw their cavalry into the pike phalanx, hopefully doing as much damage as possible, but they weren't that stupid. They did lose a few men, but many of them did manage to turn back and avoid getting impaled. Because of the repeated lance charges of the enemy cavalry, I'd lost my shield this early on in the battlefield, but thankfully I found a replacement. The cavalry made repeated charges against my phalanx line, with little result, and thankfully by this point the archers had managed to wear through their armour and were starting to rack up the casualties. I slowly but surely managed to manoeuvre into a favourable position without taking too many casualties. The phalanx, with its left flank guarded by the edge of the map, and the right flank guarded by the heavy elite Battanian infantry. Aside from sending heavy cavalry strikes at me, and sniping the low-level troops who had somehow managed to accompany me, not much had happened at this point. They'd played very, very defensively. Long minutes passed while I continued to skirmish with their cavalry and slowly but surely advance and encircle their defendable position. Long minutes passed while this played out, until finally the Battanian Fians were in a position where they were able to shoot upon the main enemy line, and they launched an all-out cavalry attack. Thankfully though, to get to the Fians, they had to go through my pike phalanx, and it didn't go very well for them at all. We ended up slaughtering most of their cavalry here, leaving their infantry and archers essentially undefended. Or at least, that's what I thought. I was careful to ensure that there was no gap in my infantry lines to allow theirs, or whatever remained of their cavalry, to sweep through and descend on my archers. I wanted to guarantee maximal damage from them as we held them up on the pike phalanx. And as I was bringing this formation into line, it seems that they had realised that we were too close, and it was now or never to launch the attack. And so they came at us with everything. First, they launched another massive cavalry assault, and they had a lot more cavalry than I expected. I thought that most of their cavalry had been destroyed. Oh, how wrong I was. And following hot on the heels of this attack was the entire body of their infantry. But thankfully, as I learned from the casualty counter in the top right hand corner, most of their infantry were not actually of spectacular quality, and my pikemen began destroying them. I spent my time patrolling the back of the pike line as usual to make sure that none of my pikemen were being killed by being stabbed in the back, so my line would maintain its integrity. After ensuring that the phalanx line was holding, I went over to the auxiliary battalions and told them to charge. It was time for us to start sweeping around their flank and destroying them from the side. I leapt into the thickest of the fray and with my two-handed masterwork phalanx began laying about all around me. It didn't take long before we had swept aside whatever was in front of the auxiliaries, and so I told the phalanx to break ranks and charge, so we could finally push these pretenders off of the field. Before long, we had the last of their vast infantry force trapped in a pincer maneuver. They didn't even try to retreat. They just died where they stood. And we killed them all. While I was hacking into the back of one line, another huge body of infantry would come up on my rear, and I would be forced back into the phalanx line in order to continue killing without being killed myself. Wave after wave of Imperial infantry descended upon us as we slaughtered their comrades. Eventually it became apparent that the infantry didn't need my help, but there was still a huge rank of archers ranged across the hill to our east. So I took the auxiliaries and rushed across to meet them. Fortunately, they were too close. They didn't have the room to pepper us with arrows in sufficient quantities to cut us down. We made contact with them swiftly and routed them. And the day was ours. And for our troubles, we had lost 39 men, but we had slain, wounded or captured over 1,000. A good day's work, I'd say. I led about a dozen of their lords into captivity, took prisoners and loot without number. In the aftermath of this victory, my kingdom seemed secure, so I decided I would invade the Western Empire, since they were the only people I was at war with anyway. I went out with the Battanian levies and put the phalanx back in Marinath, but I discovered that the Western Empire was at war with the Vlandians, and were mustering an army to deal with the Vlandians, besieging Legata. So I thought it would be funny to intercept that army and destroy it. This battle took place by the coast, and itself was not terribly eventful. One of the highlights of it was when their cavalry managed to get themselves caught on a beach and surrounded and slaughtered, but otherwise this was a relatively easy victory. And hopefully I'd made their ability to resist the Vlandians all the more difficult. The Vlandians had managed to muster a truly fearsome army of nearly 1,500 men, and with only 1,500 defenders in Legata, it didn't look like they were going to fail. So I didn't really know if there was much for me to do here, and suddenly I was informed that once again, Dunglanys was under siege by the Western Empire. So I rushed back there to see the state of play. When I arrived, I discovered 900 men besieging the city that I didn't own, one of my vassals owned, with a 369-man garrison. Now, my army was still quite battered after the battle outside of Legata, so I didn't really want to rush into this, especially as these weren't my best men. So I thought what I would do is allow the Western Imperials to try and storm Dunglanys to see how it would go for them. Once their trebuchets had breached the walls, they began to storm the city, and the casualties started mounting up. When there were only 139 men left in Dunglanys, and the Western Empire had only about 400 men assaulting them, I decided the time was right to intervene. We so completely smashed them that there was almost nothing left of them by the time that we had done, and I'd only taken 14 casualties. I spent the time in Dunglanys recovering my army and discovered that yet another vast Imperial army was heading to besiege this city. I don't know what their obsession with this place was. What I would do is wait for them to besiege the city and then sally forth to meet them. This battle took place on the side of a mountain outside of Dunglanys, and though unusual because of its locale, it wasn't especially notable, and we completely destroyed them. It wasn't that easy. At one point my army did get split into 2 battalions that had to defend themselves on opposite sides of the map. But overall the battle went well, and there's not really much to say. At this point it seemed that I had indeed fended off most of what they could throw at me, so I decided to invade their territory and take something for the trouble. The war was going well for me, and the Vlandians had taken Legata. I settled on Gasagos Castle, which was near enough to me, and so I went down, invested it, built my siege engines, and stormed it. Since I had destroyed the walls and my elite Battanian auxiliaries were far superior to the remaining militia of the castle, we just went straight in through the breaches that we had made with the siege engines. The militia was drawn up as best as they could be, I suppose, but there really wasn't a huge amount that they could do here, and my men just began hacking and slashing their way through the defenders. They put up a valiant resistance, but before long their defences crumbled, and the castle was ours. I lost 14 men, and it was an easy win. I decided to ennoble Lakim the Golden for his loyal service. This indeed would be a frontier castle. He probably wasn't going to keep it forever, but good luck, and enjoy your new fief. And just as I was leaving him to it, I discovered a sizable Imperial army approaching to take it back. So just as a quick endpoint here, I actually don't really know what the goal with this campaign is now, because I think that I have proven that with the real battle mod, the phalanx is basically unbeatable unless you have a million archers on the other side of the map. Against any other kind of infantry and cavalry, the phalanx is just destroying things. And if I find myself in a spot of bother, like with an army 5 times my size, I just bring out the 160-odd pikemen that I have and wipe the floor with them. So it's not that I'm getting bored with the campaign. I'm actually quite enjoying the campaign. But there are other things that I think I could put this style of video to use doing. So do me a favour, leave me a comment with some suggestions on what I could do for another campaign. Like I said, I think this one's pretty much finished. I've done what I set out to do, and I've conquered a small kingdom with this phalanx. And I've played a couple of extra hours that I haven't yet edited into a video like this. And I'm just winning a lot. And so, rather than continue to just stomp the rest of the map into submission, I was thinking it'd be fun to continue this format just with a different mod, or a different time period, or a different game, or whatever. So leave me some suggestions down in the comments, folks. And I hope you've been enjoying this series. I've really been enjoying making it, and I hope you've got some good ideas for what I could do next.